So hey guys, and welcome back to another episode of Amesie's Corner. How are you all doing out there? So, as those of you who have watched my show for some time, you know that my first car was a silver 1990 Mazda Miata that I purchased from a customer when I worked for a Mazda dealer here in Massachusetts. And what I want to show you is this silver 03 Mazda Miata. That brings back a lot of memories of my first car. As I was saying, I was a Mazda tech when I had that first Miata, and I loved that car. I went right through Mazda's parts catalog and figured out that a lot of the parts from the later cars, like this right here, will fit on the first generation NA Miatas, this being the second generation NB Miata, which was built from 98 through 06, I think, maybe, when they came up with the newer ones. But pretty much everything under this car is exactly the same and will bolt directly on the first gen Miata. And whenever one would come in with damage and we'd had to replace parts for one of these newer ones, I would put those, repair the parts and put them on my car. And I had a hot little Miata back in the day. I know you guys would go back and watch the video I had, the one car everyone's own. It's got my little brother who got it after me, kind of beating the bag out of it. But they're cool little cars, and unfortunately when I owned them, they weren't nearly as cool as they are today. I got a lot of heat back in the day driving that car, people saying the things they would say about a guy that owns a Miata. But I bought that car for $35 plus an hour of labor. I had to pay the guy's bill. But these are fun little cars, and the reason being is how tight they are, the layout, the front engine, rear wheel drive, and the suspension system. Now we'll get this thing up on the lift in a minute and we'll see what makes these things really cool. Let's see. Come on. Now this would be the 1.8 liter version of them. The NB, the second gen Miata, and the second or 1.5 version of the Miata. What I mean by that is, hold on a second. What I mean by that is these originally came out in 90 with a 1.6 liter engine, and then in 94 they went to a 1.8 liter engine, and they continued the 1.8 displacement right up till the, past the NB. I'm going to apologize, I don't really know much about the cars after this one, the Miatas after this one, as I had left Mazda at the time. But this one has variable valve timing, and I believe a variable swirl intake manifold, if I'm not mistaken. Maybe someone down below will know the difference or know if it does or not. So yeah, so cool little cars. Not a lot of room inside. If you're 6.5 feet tall, you're not really gonna fit in there so well. Me being not quite as tall, I fit in these perfectly, almost like they were made for me. So yeah, why don't we get this thing up on the lift and see what makes these things so darn cool. Well, okay guys, let's start from the back of this thing and see what makes these things so cool, why they hold the road so well, why there's so many grassroots racing circuits based around these cars. And yeah, so first off we'll come to the rear and we'll see a really well packaged car. Everything's up high, nice and tight. We have the double independent control arm, or independent suspension with double control arms, upper and lower. This allows the wheels to be kept really straight as far as camber and caster in the front throughout the suspension's phases. Keeps everything all in a line. Yep. Rear differential, and this is probably the weakest link of these cars right here. Anybody doing any modifications, making any more power with a Miata, you need to upgrade the differential or you're going to blow right through those. Honestly, I think my Miata went through at least 4, maybe even 5 of them between me and my brother. And it's not fun when you blow your diff. It ends your day really quick. There we go. Disc brakes, 4-wheel disc brakes all the way around, which you would expect on a sporty car, sports car. Now here is the a lot of people have heard of the term power plant frame with referring to Miatas. And what the power plant frame is this right here. See this aluminum member, this ladder member? It goes from the rear diff, bolts directly to the rear diff, and goes all the way forward and bolts to the transmission that keeps the whole driveline nice and tight to itself, so you'd have less flex, less movement. But I'll tell you one thing, these bolts back here like to freeze in. If you have to do any work on like the clutch or differential work, you got to pull this out to get the transmission out, and that can be a real pain in the ass getting that, and anybody that's done that knows that. And then here's the 5-speed manual transmission. This being an 03, this would definitely have a 5-speed. The 04 Mazda speed is the first Miata to have an actual 6-speed transmission from the factory. And if you guys remember my story about the one car everyone's owned, my first Miata, I actually got my hands on one of the first manual transmissions in the country and adapted it to fit the earlier cars. What had happened with that car to me to get the transmission is someone went on a road test on one, just got delivered, the first one we had delivered, and they skidded off the road and sent this cross member, got hit by a curve and put a hole in the transmission somewhere right in there. Nothing serious, but yeah, I just bodged it up with some JB weld and the transmission went fine happily ever after. Up front we can see the AA arm suspension. Really keeps these things cornering flat. You can put a lot of cornering loads and it won't have any body roll. You won't have any suspension geometry changes. So all in all, a pretty neat car, pretty tight car. All these subframes, this front subframe with all this bracing will go in an earlier version of this car. Basically the 03, 04, 05 is exactly the same car underneath as the NA Miata, the 1990 Miata. All these subframes will bolt right in the 90 Miata, and the upgrades you have with that is on the first gen, like the 90 and 90 through 03, or 90 through 93 rather, don't have any of this bracing. This is all bracing added in later. And if you have an older version of the car, you can get your hands on these subframes, you can bolt it in with all this bracing right into it. Really cool. Really adjustable suspension for track day. If you want to do any auto crossing, you can have different settings for it. You can actually, I've seen people mark these wheels and have different positions for different tracks, and they can just go under it and adjust it to where they want it, which is really cool. You can also get these really dialed in if you know how to use an alignment machine, which is something back in the day I used to do for the people. People would come in with their track cars. Miata is not even meant to be on the road anymore, and they would ask me to set things up on the alignment rack for different tracks. You can dial in to make the rear end tighter or looser, or oversteer or understeer at different times. Really adjustable. So another issue these cars like to have, and a lot of people need to look out for, and this car definitely has the problem, is you see this thing right here? That is a drain for the convertible top. The water can get around the top, and normally it drains out these drains. What happens is fallout and leaves and dust and everything get up into there, and it breaks down and makes this muddy compost that plugs those up, and then the water overflows into there and ends up pooling up in the rocker panels. And if you look in, I don't know if you guys can see real well, this rocker right here inside starting to rot out, and I bet you when this car gets wet, it doesn't drain out those holes. It drains out. Oh yeah, this side's really bad. Look at that. Yeah, well, it looks like a nice car on the outside, and that's what happens up here. We get the salt there, and then you got the top drains not getting cleaned out, and you end up rotting out your rockers. So this car needs some work. I mean, well, it looks like a great car, and then they put these plastic covers over it so you can't tell what's going on underneath. But yeah, so if you're gonna look at a Miata, make sure you look at that spot right there, because you know what can seem like a great car can be a rusty little devil. So why don't we put this thing down, get this thing out, and take it around the block and see how she goes around the corners. I'm looking forward to that. All right. Boy, it feels familiar. What a familiar feeling automobile. So, like I said, my first car was a Mazda Miata. I owned it for about 6 or 7 years, and I loved it to death. Before I sold it to a friend, who then sold it to my brother. Interesting. And I just got to say, this is my first time to drive one of these on the street since I sold mine 10 years ago. So one of the most important things about a Miata is make sure you're in the seat comfortably and it's adjusted to you. You want to kind of wear this car versus drive this car because it's really capable even in stock form. So now, not a powerhouse. These have about 140 to 150 horsepower, somewhere in that neighborhood. But it's not a heavy car. What are we, 2,800 in that neighborhood? Maybe a little, maybe 3,000, little, you know, well under 3,000 pounds. So it feels like a more powerful car. Oh, the handling. Oh, I forgot just how snappy these were. We're gonna have a nice light here. You really gotta hang on these cars. It really telegraphs what the rear end wants to do too. If you crash one of these cars, then you probably shouldn't be driving a performance car. Tires are a little loud on this one, and that's why it's in the shop. These are some cheap tires, and they dry rotted really quick, and it's got too many dry rot cracks to pass inspection. And the transmission is one of the slickest shifters in the automotive world. Now we got the S-curve, the favorite part. The rear end just starting to kick out. Can't beat on the project though, can't beat on the cars. Boy, does it feel an awful lot like my 90 does. You know, just the underneath of these cars is almost identical to the older versions, other than being a stiffer chassis. Not a lot of cowl shake. There is a little cowl shake. And cowl shake being when you hit a bump, you can feel the pedal box, the dashboard, and the A-pillar roofline move kind of at a different, resonate at a different frequency, for lack of a better term. Heel toe this thing, awesome. That's heel toe first. It's like the second lap we have to deal with the lights. No big deal. We're on public roads, so I'm not kicking the RPMs too high. I'm not getting into the variable valve timing, not letting that kick in. It's similar to, relatively similar to Honda's system, but not quite as advanced, not quite as aggressive as far as cam timing. Honestly, they kind of sell it as a performance upgrade, but I think it's just a way to get away from having to put an EGR valve on a motor. Now the brakes are phenomenal. Might have to do another lap. Great brakes. They never really fade. The vented fronts. I don't believe the rears are vented on these. I think the later model might have had vented rotors, which is another thing that'll work on the older cars. You could take the bigger brakes that are in the NB Miata, and as long as you use the brackets, the rears, I believe you have to use the left bracket on the right bracket on the left, and the rotors, the bigger rotors from the later car, we're going to take another lap, will all fit on the earlier car and give you much increased braking performance in an NA Miata. Other things that you can swap from an earlier version to from the newer version to the earlier version, the clutches, the clutch in the 1.8 motor will bolt right into the 1.6 motor, and it has a bigger clutch. The diameter is, I don't remember off the top of my head. It's been a long time since I had one of these apart. Squirrel early. But yeah, the bigger clutch will fit in the earlier cars, and you can use the clutch to kind of give you a little more power on takeoff. I keep trying to shift it into 6th. Keep trying to shift it into 6 because the last time I drove a Miata, it was a 6-speed. Well, I missed that car. I actually had my Miata up back in 2011. I was going to put a Saab motor into it. If I have all things, I was going to put an old Saab 9000 2.3 liter turbo in my first car, but life got in the way and I had to let that project go. Heel toe, late brake, trail brake, off and around the corner. Heel toe first. Oh, you can just heel toe these things for days. All right, it's early. We got customers coming in the shop. I gotta get to work. I wish I could just keep driving this circuit all day. Boy, I would if I could. We're gonna go kind of hot into the shop. Gonna heel toe second. Brake, heel toe first. Perfect. Oh, you can just heel toe these things for days. Now, there's not a lot of cars you can heel toe into first, but I'll tell you, Miata can do it. All right, guys, I gotta get to work. I can't have fun like this all day. But I'll tell you what, though, a job where I can wake up, come to work, and do this, it's a job I don't want to lose. Well, anyways, guys, thanks for watching, subscribing, comments down below. I read them all. I love them all. And until next time, guys, keep it out of the cabbage. I think I'm going to buy a Miata and get rid of my coffee maker.